Okay, good. So good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Welcome to Women's Torah Study Circle. And because tonight is, as I mentioned, Lag BaOmer, which is a holiday, it's called the students' holiday. Why? Throughout the years, the custom on Lag BaOmer is that all the yeshivas and the schools take the students on outings. They go to the park, they have carnivals. The custom is to shoot bow and arrows, and I'll explain about that in a minute. And like tonight at our shul, we're having an outdoor bonfire and Lag BaOmer barbecue. Please join us. There'll be social distancing, and if it rains, we're going to take it indoors with social distancing. So let's do a little brief. Good morning, Margaret. Let's do a little brief overview of Lag BaOmer. Lag BaOmer is really, anybody know what it stands for? Lamed Gimel, Lag, 33. Lamed is 30, Gimel is 3 in the gematria and the numerical values of the Omer. You know, we're counting the 49 days from Passover to the holiday of the giving of the Torah, Shavuos. Today is the 33rd, tonight will be the 33rd day in the Omer. Now, what happened on Lag BaOmer? Two things. One, Rabbi Akiva, the famous Rabbi Akiva, who we're going to talk about, a beautiful love story today, actually, with Rabbi Akiva and his wife Rachel. Students stopped dying. The pandemic, the plague of Rabbi Akiva's students, 24,000 students died during these days. From the first day till the 33rd day, the students, the plague, the pandemic stopped. So it's a day of celebration. And the second reason we celebrate is because it's the yard site, which means the day of passing of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who is the author of the Zohar. Zohar means light, the book of Kabbalah. Even though before Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, there were Kabbalists who wrote documents and manuscripts, but the first official book of Kabbalah called the Zohar, which means light, was written by Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, and he told his family and students, my yard site should not be a day of mourning, please. Make it a day of celebration. So on the day of his passing, we go out in the fields and we play with bow and arrows. Why? Why in the fields? Because for 13 years, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and his son Elazar hid in a cave in Israel from the Romans who wanted to kill them for spreading and teaching Torah. They hid. They hid. So the cave, the outing, the concept that during that time, the children studied in the fields. And when the Romans would come and hap upon a yeshiva class, a cheder, what are you doing out here? Oh, we're playing bow and arrow. We're hanging out with our bows and arrows. That's like a superficial reason. So the Torah tells us that during the days of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, no rainbow ever appeared in the sky. No rainbow ever appeared. Now, what is the shape of a rainbow? Like a bow and arrow.
Oh.
A bow and arrow. So what is the significance that a rainbow never appeared during the days of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai? So if you recall the story of the flood, remember we discussed the story of the flood, and the world is purged and cleansed and purified, and God shows Noah a rainbow, and he says, I will never, ever destroy the entire world again. And the rainbow will be like the document, the proof that I will never destroy the world. So people tend to look as a rainbow as a negative thing, that really you were supposed to be destroyed, but we're not. So we see a rainbow. Rainbow signifies the world deserves destruction, obviously, but really not. The rainbow really is a positive symbol. It's a symbol that after the flood, there's a new reality that now, if the people of the universe sin, if the people of the universe go against the will of God, I'll show you a rainbow. And you'll have a way to repent, but I will not destroy the world in its entirety. And the Zohar, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai writes that when Mashiach, the rainbow will be the sign of the coming of Mashiach. So it's really a positive symbol, not as people say, oh, you see a rainbow means we deserve punishment.
Right.
We see a rainbow signifying the new paradigm of a world that can heal itself, a world that can repent. Before Noah, I'll just repeat this point, then we'll move forward. The world could not self-heal. We were dependent on God's kindness and compassion. After the flood, God gave us the ability to self-heal, self-repent, and repair the world. A new world was reborn, a new reality was born after the Mabul, after the flood. It's a complicated concept, but that's what because just very quickly, scientifically, what's a rainbow? Drops of water rise from the surface, they refract the light of the sun, and it brings forth a prism of colors. Before Noah, there was no rainbow, would you believe it? The concept of moisture rising into the atmosphere, refracting the light of the sun did not exist. Which symbolizes that before, it wasn't up to us to be able to enact change in the universe. If we went against the will of God, we suffered the consequences. The whole world was destroyed. God could have chosen not to destroy us. After the Mabul, now the people have the ability to heal, to repent, to change, and enact a change in the world. And God says, now I forgive you, like we see with the broken tablets and so on, with the sin of the golden calf. So is it kind of clear? Listen, these concepts are not simple. Sometimes I read them and I'm like thinking, what does this mean?
And here I always thought there was a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow.
Yeah, it is. See, it is a pot of gold. The gold is the reward of knowing.
That's right.
When you fall, you can pick yourself up by your bootstraps and go on. Whereas before, someone else God had to pick you up. You couldn't pick yourself up, so to speak. Yeah, the world went through many transformations from the beginning of time, by the way. Look at us. There were giants, now we're just ordinary people. Anyway, so these are the two significant events that happened on Lag BaOmer. So I want to talk a little bit about each of these great giants of people that transformed our lives, whether we know it or not. Rabbi Akiva, by the way, is the famous scholar that wrote, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha. Love your fellow as yourself. That's Rabbi Akiva. Omer Rabbi Akiva, V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, zeklal gadol ba'torah. Shali shalach shalach shalach. What's mine is yours, is yours, is yours. Ladai, ladai, ladai. That's Rabbi Akiva. What's mine is yours. Love your fellow as you love yourself. We're going to go into that in a few minutes. But I want to go back into the history of Rabbi Akiva because it's mind-boggling. Rabbi Akiva was a child of converts, Jewish converts, and he was a shepherd, an ignorant shepherd. He didn't know even how to read Hebrew. He never got a formal Jewish education. He was a shepherd on the land, in the land of Israel, on the property of one of the third richest men in Israel, Kalba Savua. Okay? He was a shepherd. Now, Kalba Savua, Margaret, good morning, had an only child, a beautiful, gorgeous girl. Her name was Rachel. And Rachel would observe Akiva working on her father's property. And she comes to, and suitors were presented to her. Marry this bacher, marry this Talmud Chacham, marry this rabbi. And she comes to her dear father. She says, Papa, Abba, I want to marry Akiva the shepherd. Her father goes crazy. What? What? A shepherd? You're going to marry a shepherd, an ignoramus, a guy who can't read an aleph and a bet? Absolutely not. You marry him, I disown you. You will live a life of poverty. But she saw in her future husband a light, an energy, something unique, something special. So against her father's will, she marries Akiva. And they live in poverty. They live in poverty. They live in poverty. In the winter, they freeze. In the summer, they boil. She becomes a laundry lady. She washes other people's clothes to support her and her husband. And she keeps telling her husband, Rabbi Akiva, now he was called Akiva, go study in yeshiva. Go study. He says, I'm 40 years old. You think it'll come into my thick head? You think I can get a bachelor's, a master's, a PhD at age 40? Must be Mr. Meshuggah. And she sees in him a tremendous potential. And the story goes, he's sitting at the edge of a river and he sees an indentation in a rock and he sees how droplets of water are falling. And over hundreds of years, the drops of water have caused an indentation in the rock, right? I mean, after 1,000 years, something drips. It's going to cause a hole in your basement. Trust me, if water keeps dripping and you don't pay attention, it will cause damage over hundreds of years. So he looks and he says to himself, if water can penetrate a rock, which is so hard, can indent a rock, then my brain, my life can be indented by water, symbolic of Torah. Torah is called water, Mayim Chayim. And he tells his wife, Rachel, yes, I'm going to go to yeshiva. And he goes to yeshiva. And I want to come back to the rock because it's pivotal in the discussion here. And for 12 years, he studies in yeshiva and he is brilliant. He becomes one of the big giants. And after 12 years, he makes his way home. He's going to go see his wife. He hasn't seen her in 12 years. You know what it means, 12 years? And as he's about to enter his shack, he overhears his wife arguing with a woman who says to her, what's wrong with you? You think your husband's ever going to come back? You think he's going to amount to anything? Go back to your father. You're living a life of poverty. Go back to your father, beg his forgiveness, and move on with your life. And she says, it's already 12 years. She says to the woman, I would give another 12 years for my husband to study Torah. He overhears this and he doesn't even go in, he goes back. And he studies for another 12 years and he becomes the greatest Rebbe scholar of the generation. Listen what happens now. So now he's coming back to town. The town where his wife Rachel hears the great Rebbe Akiva is coming. Rebbe and Kalba Savua, one of the board members of the town, they prepare a feast and a chariot to bring him, never knowing this is his son-in-law. And he comes into town surrounded by thousands of his students like a parade. And they bring him a crown to put on his head. He is the Rebbe of the generation. And a woman in a tattered, clean dress pushes her way forward to greet her husband. And the students see a woman go, what? What's Tootsie though? What is she doing here? And they're about to chase her away. And he says to them, no. Sheli v'shalach shelah. Me and you are all because of her. And everyone realizes this is his wife. And you can imagine her father watches this happen to the floor. He has like oh my gosh, what did I do? And because of that, he pledges all his wealth to them. And he asks for forgiveness. And from then on, they live a life of wealth. Because of her, Rabbi Akiva says, it's me and you. Everything you have is because of my wife. Everything I have is because of my wife. She saw in me the potential, the light, the ability at age 40 to become who I am today. One of the greatest love stories in the Torah. Why? Because it shows you Rachel, no ordinary woman, could have had anything she wanted, right? She saw in a shepherd and a convert, an ignoramus, so to speak. She saw a light. She saw an energy, and she released that light and energy. What does that show you about her? What kind of special woman was this? How many of us would even do that? Give up a life of, she was the third richest, she was like the third richest girl in Israel. Right, Kalba Savua. So again, it shows it takes a special woman to see a light, to see an energy, and tap into that, encourage it, cultivate it. And when I read the story years ago as a girl, I was like blown away. Oh, I want to be like a Rachel. So what really, good morning, Judy, good morning. Welcome. What is it, what do I take? And I'll say what I'm taking out of it. You could tell me what you take out of it. That if I could be 1% of Rachel, if I could do it with my child, with my husband, with my family, with my friends, when you see a light, be the one to cultivate that light, that energy. And even if you don't see it, what does it hurt to give a compliment to build up a person so they can move forward sometimes? Sometimes all a person needs is a kind word and a compliment so that their day becomes better, or their life, they feel a little confident to go on. So I said to myself years ago, and I read this, I said, I want to try to be a little bit more of the Rachel type, not always the critic, more like build up, tap into someone's light and energy. Words of like the 5 love languages, you know, we talk about it sometimes. One of them is words of affirmation, telling a person, you know what, you did good. Wow, it was amazing. And you never know how that compliment or that encouragement could bring out someone's life and positive energy. It's as simple as that. So yeah, I'm never going to be a Rachel, trust me. But can we be like a Rachel? So this is the great Rabbi Akiva and his wife. You never know the backstory about people. Think about this great story of who Rabbi Akiva was. And Rabbi Akiva wrote, a man is his wife. Because of this, he writes, who am I? My wife. Isha hibesa. My wife is my home is my wife. Which doesn't mean she's a housekeeper. It means she creates the foundation of everything that goes on in our lives. I always say, don't be a housekeeper, be a homemaker. A homemaker is not a housekeeper. A homemaker is you build the foundation of your home, your relationships, your spouse, your children, your parents, and so on. This is what it means. So this is the great Rachel and the great Rabbi Akiva. I want to add one more thing. So we said he had 24,000 students, right? 24,000 students, wow. And there was a plague and they all died. Why? The Gemara, the Talmud tells us why. They lacked compassion and love for one another. They lacked tolerance. Different opinions, different political views, they did not allow anyone else to disagree. They fought, even though they fought about holy topics, the lack of intolerance, the lack of respecting another's opinion, another's political party, another one's views caused this tremendous pandemic in their lives, this epidemic. Now you could see they're students of Rabbi Akiva. We're not talking about they're studying psychology, they're studying math, they're studying physics, they're studying medicine, studying Torah. And yet you see, they were taken to a higher standard, of course. But look what happens to them because of their lack of tolerance. Now, again, you and I don't know if we could handle such judgment, but, you know, they would take, the God judged them more harshly. So why do we celebrate Lag BaOmer? The plague stopped, yeah, but 24,000 died. There wasn't one student left. That's no cause of celebration. You know? 24th, you know, if the plague would have stopped the middle and only half, you could say, okay, but what's the celebration? Why are we celebrating Lag BaOmer? Because the plague seized 24,000. Rabbi Akiva was left with an empty yeshiva, an empty school. Nobody was left in the school. Now, we're talking about adults. That's a cause of celebration. We go out and we have bonfires and barbecues. I know we're also doing it in the merit of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, but why does the Torah tell us also for this? And so now let's go back to the drop of water and see what happens next. This is the key. Let me ask you. So Rabbi Akiva saw a drop of water's indent in a rock. Mm-hmm. Okay, Manish is like my brother used to say, it's a chacham from the Manishtana, the wise one of the Manishtana. It's like a sarcastic way of saying a genius. Takes a genius. Any kid can tell you, drop of water, drop, drop, drop. You burn a hole in the rock. I mean, you indent a hole in the rock. Like, what's the great novice idea that Rabbi Akiva saw the water on the rock? He said, I could be like that. My head is like a rock. Torah can penetrate me even at age 40. So that's what we learned in school, because it's an easy way for the teacher to explain to the students why Rabbi Akiva goes to school at age 40. It's a nice explanation, but really? And the answer is now deeper. It's not that he saw after 1,000 years there's an indent in the rock. It's what Rabbi Akiva writes in his writings, which I'll share with you soon, is that it's the first drop that matters. It's the first step that changes everything. The minute that first drop hit the rock, it's what caused the transformation. 1 drop, 2 drops, 3 drops. Before you know it, it's 1,000,000 trillion drops, and it causes a dent. So what Rabbi Akiva saw in this is that taking the first step is the key. The 1 drop is the key. And that's what he saw. That's what he saw. And how do we see it? Was look what happens when the 24,000 students die. Look what Rabbi Akiva does. What do you think he does? He could come and Rachel say, listen, honey, we had a terrible tragedy. My entire yeshiva university passed away. God forbid, not the one now. My entire student body is gone. I need to retire. It's time for me to become a recluse or stay home and study for myself. It's a sign from heaven. 24,000 died. Time to board up the yeshiva. Closed for business. What does he do? He moves to another part of Israel, and the Talmud tells us what happens. He chooses 5 students: Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who we spoke about, author of the Zohar, and Rabbi Elazar ben Shemua. And he opens up a new yeshiva with these 5 students. And these 5 students, if you read about them in the Talmud and Ethics of Our Fathers, are 5 of the greatest scholars and rebbes and rabbis that come forth from Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, author of the Zohar, one of these 5. Imagine if Rabbi Akiva would have shuttered off his yeshiva and said, it's over. I can't do it anymore. This is awful. This has demoralized me. It's over for me. He remembers the 1 drop. All it takes is 1 drop. I had 24,000, but I'm going to start again. 1 drop. Put 1 foot in front of the other. Take 1 step. And that's going to change everything. That changes everything in our lives. That's what he was showing. That's what he analyzed. It's the 1 drop that starts it off. It's never, you don't look at the trillion, look at the 1 drop. The 1 penny you give for tzedakah. The 1 act of goodness. The 1 step in the right direction. That's all it takes. You know, it's like the first day of your diet. That gives you the energy for the next day. If you could do it 1 day, you could do it 100 days. So that's what happens. He reopens with 5 students. To say 5? He had a Hebrew school with a 24,005. What a loser. Who teaches 5 students when you have 24,000? It's almost like the professor. What happened to our professor? No, because he realized 1 + 1 + 1 + 1. And these are 5 of the greatest legends that we read about in the Torah, who taught the most deepest, gorgeous, beautiful concepts and wrote the most magnificent works of the Torah. This is Rabbi Akiva. So now we get an idea of what it is, what motivated Rachel, what motivated Rabbi Akiva. What a power couple, huh? Talking about the 10 habits of highly effective people. They've written works, the 10 habits of highly effective people. Thinking about it. So before we move on, let's hear from everybody here. What are your thoughts on the situation? Any ideas?
That was a beautiful story and lesson. It really was.
You like Rabbi Akiva? Doesn't you love Rachel, his wife? I envision her like, wow, she's something else. I envision her like this like a Queen Esther type, you know?
So is she the basis of the whole idea of the woman being the center of the home and being the most important light energy of the home? Like the center of it all, you know what I'm trying to say? Like the husband can go off and study and the woman has the most important part because she's home?
Yeah, but
did it all come from her?
Yeah, but let's use home in a way, in a positive light. Not she's stuck at home while he's the
No. Raising the children and so forth.
She had a career. She was a laundry lady. But anyway, I'm that being a little jokey there. But no, yeah. But it doesn't only start with her. If you go back in time, you have the matriarchs: Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. Then you have the prophetess Miriam, the prophetess Devorah, Yocheved, the wife of, you know what I mean? Throughout our history, we have women who are more, time and time again, teach us the influence of the feminine energy in the world. You know, she's just another illustration of how when a woman taps into her feminine energy, she can transform the world. She not only transformed herself and her husband, she transformed an entire generation without even knowing it. She did what she thought was good for her husband, build him up and encourage him to go to college, so to speak, and say, you can have a career, you can be a PhD. And look what he turns out to. Boy, was she right. How many of us are able to look at a person and say, wow, that person has potential. My husband really has potential. My child really has potential. It's the ability to look beyond the exterior and see a person for who they truly are. It could be even in small things. Encouraging your spouse or encouraging your child or encouraging a family member or friend to be more than they are.
Did
I
they
like
have
that.
children?
Pardon?
Did they have children?
Yeah. Remember the story with Rabbi Akiva's daughter I told another time on her wedding date? There was a decree she was supposed to die. Remember that story? Want me to share it again?
Yeah, share it again.
Beautiful story. Rabbi Akiva's daughter went to bed the night before her wedding, went to sleep, and on the wedding morning of her wedding, she hears screaming. They go in and they see above her headboard is a hairpin stuck into the head of a poisonous snake. In other words, the hairpin, what happened was she came home late at night, took out her hairpin from her hat, stuck it in the headboard, and most probably killed the snake. So her father, Rabbi Akiva, calls her into his office and says, Tochtadel, tell me what happened yesterday. Tell me everything happened. She said, Daddy, nothing special. I was in the kitchen and a poor man knocked on the door of the kitchen where they're cooking the food for my wedding. And they asked for food. And the chef said, no, this is for the wedding. So I said to the chef, excuse me, please go give this poor man and his family food. And I put out a tremendous amount of food for the poor on before my wedding day. So her father said, let me tell you what happened. When his wife was pregnant, a fortune teller, a stargazer, says to Rabbi Akiva, your daughter will die on her wedding day. And Rabbi Akiva never shared it because he was filled with trepidation, thinking it might happen. And there's this passage that says, "Tzedakah tatzil memaves," charity saves us from death. So by her charitable act on the day before her wedding, she saved her life. And this is what happened.
Wow.
His daughter, she saves her own life by being charitable the day before her wedding. Her life was spared. This is the story with Rabbi Akiva's daughter.
He didn't see his children for 24 years, right?
He didn't see his wife for 24 years. Yeah. But remember, he was with her before he went to yeshiva. He gave birth, had children before he went to yeshiva.
Right.
He
One
was
of the-
40 when he went to
One of the things I liked is that after the 24,000 died because of intolerance and lack of compassion, that you can't just study by rote, it has to have meaning.
Yeah.
That was a great lesson.
Derech eretz kadma l'Torah, it says, respect comes before Torah. We discussed it last week that people sometimes use religion as an excuse for abhorrent behavior. And anybody who does that, you know that they're not so religious.
Mhm.
Derech eretz kadma l'Torah. You can't sit and study all day, and then when someone comes near you, you don't have time for them. You don't have compassion for them. You don't have time to help them, feed them, listen to them, talk to them. I'm studying. That's not applying your education to life. God gave us a twofold role. Yes, we should study, we should learn. It's a mitzvah to study Torah, but also it's a mitzvah to act and actualize what you study. What's the use of studying about kindness in theory if you never act kindly? What's the use about studying about charity if you don't know how to give $1 to tzedakah? But you read about it, good for you. The world was created by God that to actualize everything, bring it into actualization by doing it. Imagine if someone put food by you 3 times a day, but you weren't allowed to eat it. You would starve. Right? But you saw the food. You have to eat the food in order to be satisfied. That's the concept. God didn't mean study and don't do anything with it. Studying brings to action. If it doesn't, there's a problem. Imagine you study your whole life to be a medical doctor and then you sit around. If you're not going to heal people, if you're not going to help people, did you just study because you wanted the knowledge of medicine? Perhaps, but then what did you do with that knowledge, So that's the concept. You cannot use religion as an excuse for bad behavior, unacceptable behavior, and say, I'm a religious Jew. You're not a religious Jew, obviously. How religious are you already if you don't apply what you studied? You might be a scholar, but you may you're not a mensch. My aunt always has a joke. There's the 5th Shulchan Aruch. There's 4 books of the Code of Jewish Law, and then there's the 5th one called Common Sense. Like I've discussed this many times, like somebody has a terrible tragedy in their lives. That's not the time for you to go tell them what they did wrong and they're being punished. For you is to show compassion and love. If they want to self-judge, they could self-judge. But I'm using that as a typical example of people who use religion to prove their point.
Mhm.
That's not, Maimonides talks about this at great length. Don't point, it's one thing if they come to you and they go, look, can you help me find out why? What's going on in my life? What am I doing wrong? What am I doing right? That's one thing. They're coming to you as a friend, as a rabbi, as a confidant. But not you go to someone and you start telling them what they did wrong. You see? First of all, how do you know? I see many people that are not what we call not good people, and they're living a life of Riley. They have everything they need and want and more. And I see very good people who are suffering. So we cannot really evaluate people based on our own ideas and logic. Okay, anyway, we went off on a tangent. But just want to share one more beautiful concept of Rabbi Akiva. He's the one that wrote, "V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha." Love your fellow like you love yourself. The question is, can self-love is the greatest love? How can God command us to love someone? Now, God can command us to give, study, but emotion, how does God command us to have an emotion? Love someone. Can you really make someone love? You go out with a guy 10 times, 15 times, you don't feel love. You're not going to marry the guy. Your mother and father will say, no, you should love him. He's perfect for you, but you don't feel it. You're not going to get married to the person. You cannot evoke in someone emotion. You can't make someone love someone, right? Unless you have a different experience than I do. You can't make someone feel like a boy wrote to the Rebbe. He's dating a girl. She's everything on great, but he doesn't feel in his heart a feeling of love. And the Rebbe said, you need hamshachas alev. You need to feel. If you don't feel, girl's not for you. Doesn't matter how great she is on paper. She's smart, she's intelligent, she's kind, she's refined, she's religious, she's pious, she's generous, but he doesn't feel it. Maybe date a lesser quality and you'll feel, so the point is you need the love in the heart. But how do you command someone to love? So now you analyze it like this. What the Torah is saying, using it as a noun, not as an act. As a noun. Act with love, and you will bring love. Act lovingly towards your fellow. And by acts of love, you will bring to love. It's not telling you to feel love, but act. It's using it as a verb, act lovingly, the Torah is telling us. That doesn't take emotion to act lovingly. Act lovingly means someone asks you a favor. You don't have to love them to do them a favor. Someone needs something, you do it because they need it. And when, it's interesting because I remember reading an article, a guy was dating a girl, he wasn't feeling loving, and the therapist said, do acts of love, it'll bring love. And that's what happened. He started to do things for her, and that brought love. When you do acts of love, it brings love in your heart for the person. So the Torah is saying, act lovingly, it will bring you to love the person. Obviously, the acts evoke in us emotion, bring out our heart, open our hearts. So v'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, act with love towards your fellow like you would want for yourself. That's what Rabbi Akiva is saying. That's the mitzvah. Act with love. Can't make someone feel love, but act lovingly. It's a difference, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So that's the thought. Treat it like a verb. Or an action. Wait, is action what's action? An adverb? Whatever. The grammar. Margaret, you're a grammar expert, aren't you? Okay. So everybody understand what Rabbi Akiva is saying?
Yes.
So it's a very beautiful, beautiful concept that if you act lovingly, it will bring love. It will bring you to love someone. So that's a very good thing. Do acts of love for someone and makes you love them more. I guess if my husband brings me flowers every single week, maybe finally he'll, Okay. So now let's talk a little bit about Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, author of the Zohar, and the concept of the bow and arrow. And before I go to the bow and arrow, I want to switch to another topic with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai because I read it and I was like blown away. So I hope you'll enjoy it as well. So the story, a couple comes to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. They go, Rabbi, we want to get divorced. We're married for 10 years. We couldn't have children. And we don't want to stay married anymore. And if you read in the laws of the Code of Jewish Law, if a couple is married for 10 years and they can't conceive a child, either the wife can't or the husband can't, either or the wife or the husband can ask for a divorce. In Jewish law, you're permitted to ask for a divorce if after 10 years you don't have a child. Doesn't mean you should ask for a divorce. It means you can ask for a divorce. Okay, we're not going to go into the nuances of this. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says to the couple, okay, you want a divorce, we'll give you a divorce. However, you need to do something first. You need to make a celebration. Just like you started the marriage with a tremendous wedding celebration, right? And a feast. You have to end the marriage with a wedding celebration of that caliber. They're a wealthy couple, so they go home and they make a tremendously large feast in their home. They're ending their marriage, they make a feast. When the feast is about to begin and everyone is invited, the husband says to the wife, anything you want from this house, I want you to take. I don't care how precious it is. Gold, silver, anything you want from this house, please take. She says, okay, very good. Anyway, she puts out a tremendous amount of liquor. She makes sure that her husband gets inebriated. And he's now shikevi light, like they said. He's drunk as lot. It's an expression in English. And he falls asleep. She goes to her servants. She says, lift him up and bring him to my home, which is where her parents lived. They put him in the chariot and they bring him to her house, and she puts him into her bedroom and where she's sleeping. He wakes up in the morning with a tremendous hangover. This is a story in the Talmud, everybody. And he looks around, where am I? He's all confused. So she says, where are you? You're in my house, my parents' house. He says, why am I here? Aren't we getting divorced? She says, yes. But yesterday you very clearly told me that I should take the most valuable thing I want from the house and bring it here to my house. And so I took the one thing that I value most in our house, I took and I brought here. It was him. She valued him the most of anything in her life. So she brought him with her to her house. He looks at her. He's so overcome with love and emotion. He says, we cannot get divorced. We love each other too much. We cannot get divorced. So they go back to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and they said, Rebbe, we don't want to get divorced. We realize how much we love each other. So Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai gives them a blessing and they give birth to a little baby. And they live happily ever after. So this is a story with Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Now, we know, according to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who wrote the Zohar, the book of Kabbalah, what is the fundamental basic of the esoteric parts of Torah? That everything in the physical world has a spiritual counterpart. Nothing here doesn't have a counterpart in the spiritual realm, in the esoteric realms. In other words, Carrie, your painting behind you has a spiritual counterpart in the heavens.
Wow.
Diane, your pottery has a spiritual counterpart. Margaret, your pillow has a spiritual counterpart. Everything has a spiritual counterpart. This story is a true story, but it also manifests itself. The reason why is it written up in the Talmud? Because now, based on Kabbalah, I'm going to share with you how this is the story of your life and my life. This is the story of our lives. And this is how the secret, one of the secrets on how to tap in and create the best relationships in our lives, whether in our physical relationships with our spouses or our spiritual relationship with God and our souls. So now the Kabbalah explains like this. Now, where did I see this? It is a Kabbalistic discourse. It's called a Hasidic discourse, which is Jewish mysticism, written by Rabbi Shner Zalman of Liadi, the first Chabad Rebbe, known as the Alter Rebbe. And he wrote the Tanya, which takes the Zohar, takes Kabbalah, and teaches us how to apply Kabbalah into our daily lives. So a lot of stuff I share you is from the Tanya. Because Kabbalah is very esoteric. It's very detached. It's very abstract. The Tanya teaches us, how do you take these esoteric ideas and apply it in our lives? How do we improve our lives, enhance our lives through the knowledge of Kabbalah? Now, some people like to just study Kabbalah because they feel very holy and roly, and they're like, oh, I'm going to meditate. I personally grew up with the philosophy, you study Kabbalah, you study Hasidus, you study Tanya to make your life better, to bring joy and happiness into your life, to transform how you look at yourself and the world around you. I'm not so into sitting into transcendental meditation. I can't even sit in yoga for 2 minutes. That's my own personal. So for me to sit and meditate all day on the emanations of God is very hard for me. Maybe you can do it. For me, studying Kabbalah is more, how can I become a better person by this? How can in my rush of life apply it in my life so it becomes part and parcel of my life? That's how I look at Kabbalah and Chassidus. So now Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai takes this to the next step and explains this. The Alter Rebbe takes this story from the Talmud and teaches us a very profound way of looking at our relationships. What happened with this husband and wife? If they really loved each other, children are not necessary to have a loving, happy marriage. It's a benefit of marriage. It's beautiful. They needed to realize what they had. In the marriage, they were stuck. They didn't see what they had. They focused on the reward. We're going to have a child. We're going to have a child. We're going to have a child. They weren't able to focus on he and she and he. So they went to divorce. And now, separated, knowing and seeing that this is going to be over, and I'm not going to be with him, and he's not going to be with me anymore, they realized what they didn't have. They realized what they really wanted in life, that it wasn't really about the child. So they needed the separation, both mentally and physically, to realize what they really wanted out of life. Sometimes you need a little bit time away to know what you really want. So they separated. Yeah, they were going to get separated. The wine brought out. The guy got drunk, right? Mm-hmm. Oh, by the way, who initiates the whole coming back together? The wife. Mm-hmm. She has a plan. She makes her husband so drunk, and he says, "Take the most valuable thing in the house, silver, gold, whatever you want." She said, she takes him. She takes him. So it comes from her feminine energy again, to bring him where he's meant to be, back with her. Why didn't he get her drunk? You know what I mean? See, it's the feminine energy. We can't get away from it, girls, no matter what we do. Every story I see it. So whoever tells you the Torah is anti-woman, they're not studying the right Torah. They got to get it back. They got to get into the real Torah. So anyway, so what lacked? They needed that separation. Once they had the separation, they realized we don't need a child to be happy in our lives, to be who we are meant to be. Then when they realized that it was all about them and nothing external, the portals of heaven opened and they were able to have a child. Till then, they couldn't have the child. The energy wasn't there. The energy needed to create the child couldn't come. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai could have just given them a blessing. Okay, you know what? Don't get divorced. I'll give you a child. He couldn't give the blessing till they came to the place where they could receive the blessing from a good place. Children are not the solution to bad marriages. We all know that. You know, they exaggerate a bad marriage because now you have another tzara, the crying baby, you have to support. The kid is not always the way you meant it to be, right? It adds more stress to a marriage. It doesn't create a happier marriage because you had a child, it's a distraction. And what happens when your children are grown up and away from home? You look across the table, who are you? We haven't spoken in 10 years. I was busy raising the child. I didn't even know you were around. Happens to all of us. The children, the husband is left somewhere else, or the wife, my child, where's my wife? Oh, my wife. Oh, I have a wife. Oh, yes, she's the mother. So sometimes the separation creates the awareness that, you know what, I really want to be with him and her, or him or her. So now let's go back to the Alter Rebbe. So the Alter Rebbe says like this, you get married, right? The Jewish people are the bride, God is the groom, you're married, you got the Torah, you got the rules and regulations. But you know what, guess what? It didn't turn out the way I meant my life to be. I don't know why God gave me this life. That's not what I wanted for myself. I wanted this type of life, God gave me this type of life. I wanted to be here and now I'm here. What went wrong? This is not for me. I can't work with this. I didn't have the child I wanted. I don't have the joy and happiness that I looked for in my life in this relationship. I don't need it. And you distance yourself. You alienate yourself from God, from your soul. It's not what I wanted. God, you're not exactly what I meant to be like. I thought I'd be, relationship with you, my life would be different. I thought I would have a better life. I thought there would be no death in the family. I thought there would be no illness. I thought that there would be more wealth. I thought I would be more popular, whatever you wanted for yourself in your life. I thought I would be more accomplished. What you dealt me is not what I envisioned. I need a little break here. And you separate. But if you can drink a little wine, wine symbolic of mitzvahs, and come back, you realize that you cannot define your life by what you thought it should be and thought it could be, but rather what it is. Deal with what you have, and you'll be much happier in the relationship. Don't try to step away from your life and separate. Go back to what it is. This is what I have. This is what where God put me. There must be something here for me. And if you could tap into that and realize you are meant to be where you are and deal with where you are, you'll have a happy marriage. You'll have a happy relationship. I remember I was going to bride classes. You know, they teach you the laws of mikvah. When you have your period, don't touch your husband, stay in a separate bed, and then you get back together again, blah, blah, blah. Very traumatic for a girl getting married because, you know, you're learning all these laws of separation and, you know, and you didn't even kiss the guy yet, you know, because you in the religious world, till you're married, there's no touching, there's no physical intimacy. So the teacher says, and some of you are going to marry lemons. This is what the teacher is telling us. And I'm like, Ma, you know, some of us are going to marry lemons. And that's always like a family joke. My sister-in-law also had the same teacher that notified all of us that some of us are going to end up with lemons. So let's say you end up with a lemon, you end up with a shlemazel, a nudnik, shlemiel. See, you are meant to be in this relationship. Let's see how I can make the best of it. He might be a shlemiel, but he has a heart of gold. He might be a shlemazel, but guess what? The other one is not a shlemazel, and look what she has to deal with. He might be a nudnik, but so what? So what the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai in the story of the Talmud, the Alter Rebbe is saying that we have expectations in our relationships. And we want to have a child. We want this. We want a reward out of it. But if you could look at it and value the relationship and not the external rewards that come with it, then you could get yourself in a place where you look at your spouse or you look at God, whatever way you're looking at relationship, and build on what you have, not on what you should have, what you could have had, what you feel you needed to have, or what you feel you deserve to have. Sometimes we feel we deserve it. I deserve. Now, I just want to underline something very important. Doesn't mean you shouldn't have high expectations for yourself. Doesn't mean you have to be a schmata in a relationship. The abused. This is not talking about where it's you have to get out of the relationship. We're talking about a relationship that is basically has a healthy foundation. I'm not talking, God forbid, you're in a destructive relationship. And remember, also, we're talking about our relationship with God. That if we could look at our relationship not about reward and punishment. How come God did not reward me? I did so much good in my life. Where's my reward, God? Where's my reward? If you can move away the peripherals, what the Alter Rebbe is saying, and see the relationship as the reward, the connection as your reward, not what you could get out of it, you will have a happy, joyous, good life. Because again, you're working with what you have, not what you think you should have, what you expect to have. And then the portals of the reward will open up when you least expect it. When you look at the relationship with God and see what it truly should be and could be, that's will bring out the reward. That's why it says char mitzvah mitzvah. The reward of the mitzvah is the mitzvah. The reward of a good relationship is the good relationship. When you have a fight with your spouse in the morning and he goes off to work, you go off to work. You didn't hit each other. What's the punishment? The punishment is the pain of that fight that morning. No one had to pat you or throw something at you for you to feel the pain. The pain is, you know what? He went to work and I went to work and we can't resolve it till we both come home tonight. It's a painful day. It's not a happy day. The reward of in the morning when there's a good relationship, you give each other a hug and a kiss. Have a great day, honey. Can't wait to see you tonight. And you leave or he leave or you both leave. What's the reward? He didn't give you a diamond ring. The reward was you both smiling because you left the day in a happy note. The reward is the good relationship. The reward, the punishment is the bad relationship. You know what I mean? You don't need to trip and fall to feel pain when you have a fight with your spouse or your child. Sometimes you send your kid off to school or somewhere and you insulted them and you gave them even a cup. Like you said, you know what? Don't be a dummy like you were yesterday. The kid goes to school, I'm a dummy. And you feel terrible. Why'd you insult your child? You didn't have to hit your child. The punishment for you was that you sent your child off in a terrible place. You insulted your child insulted you back, and now you both had a terrible day. So the reward of a good relationship is the good relationship. So when we can look at our relationships, not for what we get out of it, but rather that is there in a good way, that's the reward. When the couple was able to see each other, that they didn't need anyone else, they said to Rabbi Shemecha, no, we want to stay married. We actually now see what we have. This is what Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai is selling in this story. That's why the story is written down, because it is the story of how we have to look at our lives, how we are, how we have to be. And trust me, this is not easy to understand. Even I'm struggling to convey, but I hope I tried in a small way to kind of tell you, give it over this very deep Kabbalistic thought. It is a very deep concept. If you think about it, it's not so simple. So I hope I explained it to the best of my ability. Does anybody want to add anything or say anything?
I just continue to marvel at the wisdom of the Torah. Just so good.
I know there's so many treasures. There's so many treasures.
So smart.
Should I, to enclose, should I share a concept about the bow and arrow, or should I share something from Ethics of Our Fathers? What?
Ethics. I vote ethics. I don't know, whatever. anyone else wants.
Sure, ethics, fine.
Okay, so we won't go to the bow and arrow. It's not an appealing topic. So I want to share with you a very quick thought on the ethics of our fathers, because if you recall, between the holiday of Passover and Shavuos, it's a custom to study the chapters of ethics of our fathers, which are basically like from Rabbi Akiva, love your fellow as yourself, interesting, what I call character building, character building, how to build character. So there's a very cryptic, we're not going to be able to study the whole thing, but I'll give you 5 minutes of it. So basically, Akiva, this is from Rabbi Akiva, that's why I'm sharing it from you, says like this: payment is exacted from a person with his knowledge and without his knowledge. Ethics of our fathers. Okay? Good. One of his lines. Next one, he says, Akiva says like this: consider 3 things so that you will not come to sin. Know where you come from, know where you're going, and know to whom you are destined to give a verdict and accounting, which means God. Okay? So now Hasidus, Jewish mysticism, asks a question. Rabbi Akiva says, know to whom you are destined to give a verdict and an accounting. What's wrong with this sentence? If you're a lawyer or you're in a legal court, what comes first, the verdict or the accounting?
The accounting.
Exactly. The jury can't give a verdict until they hear the accounting of what happened. So why does Rabbi Akiva, and we know in the Torah, ethics of our fathers and the entire Torah, every word, every nuance means something. Why does the Torah say give the verdict and then give the accounting? It should be the opposite. You give the accounting and then God gives the verdict. Sinned, didn't sin, punished, not punished, guilty, not guilty. So Hasidus tells us something so mind-boggling. When I read this, I was blown away because I never heard this before. I heard a little bit, but not in depth. So if we don't finish it today, we maybe pick it up next week if there's an interest. So listen to this unbelievable concept, and you'll understand it, and I'll tell you a story. Everyone knows King David, right? The famous King David?
Yep.
Let me tell you the story of King David. And this story is also a very complicated story, and I'm not going to be able to explain what happened. King David is married to Abigail. He had many wives, and he sees a beautiful woman called the famous Bathsheba. He sees a beautiful woman, Bathsheba. He takes her. He's intimate with her. And then the Tanakh, the book of the prophets, tells us the story in the book of Samuel, how this is during a time of war, because they would have to wage war, and her husband, because she was a married woman, is sent by King David to the front of the war, the front lines, and he's killed. This is one story. Now, officially, according to the commentaries, in the time of the Beit HaMikdash, in the time of the books of the time of King David, when a Jewish man went to war, they would issue a divorce to their wives. Why? Because if they were MIA or killed and no one could see what happened to them, it's a terrible thing. The widow never knows if she's indeed a widow. So the law in the Torah was that, and during the time of war, all the men would give out divorces. They were officially divorced. So they went to war. If God forbid they disappeared or they were killed and no one could find the body, the widow was left to remarry. Otherwise, she can't remarry. Where's the husband? Maybe he's still alive. It's a very serious halachic problem in Jewish law. So officially, when King David takes Bathsheba, Uri, who's her husband, had already issued a divorce because he was fighting this during the wars, even though King David sends him to the front lines and he dies. So listen what happens. This is what happens. So God says to the prophet, Nassan the prophet, who was the prophet at the time, go to King David and reprimand him. He has to suffer the consequences of what he did. Now, we're not going to analyze the whole story of what really happened here. We don't have time, but this is the basic story. Now, this is another beautiful thing in Jewish life, the checks and balances. If you look at the history of kings, no priest, no religious leader could ever go to a king and criticize them. A priest would go criticize the Pope, would criticize the king, the Pope would be beheaded. The king was absolute rule. But in Torah life, in Jewish life, the king always had a prophet, a Rebbe. So if, God forbid, the king transgressed, the prophet sent by God would go to the king and said, you did wrong. So there was checks and balances in Jewish life, always. It never was absolute power, because absolute power collapsed absolutely, as we know. So Nasan HaNavi comes to King David at the behest of God. And this is what Nasan HaNavi, Nasan the prophet, says to King David. He tells him a story. Very interesting. It's a little bit cryptic. This is the story. There were two men in the city. One very, very rich man, very, very poor man. Now, the rich man had a huge herd of goats and cows. And a wayfarer comes, and the poor man had only one little goat. And this little lamb fed the entire family. It gave milk. And it was part of the mishpacha. They had one lamb, they cherished it. This was their sustenance. So a wayfarer comes to the rich guy and says, I need food, I need something. So the rich man is stingy. He has a flock of hundreds of lamb, but what does he do? He goes to the poor man's lamb, slaughters it, and feeds the wayfarer. Instead of taking from his thousands of sheep and lamb, he takes from the poor guy, the one and only lamb that sustains the family. Terrible story, right? Mm-hmm. So Nasan HaNavi says, what do you think? What is this verdict for this wealthy man? He says to the king. Understand? So King David becomes very angry. He says the man has done something, he's liable for death. He had no pity on the poor man, and he should repay him. So Nasan HaNavi looks at David HaMelech. What does he say to him? You are that man. He tells him a story so that David HaMelech should see what is the verdict for someone whose wealth, he has everything. He's the king of Israel. He takes the one wife from that guy, and that guy ends up dead on the front lines. So Nasan HaNavi, in an indirect way, asks King David to pass judgment on himself. Mm. Understand what happened here? Mm-hmm. Instead of Nasan HaNavi coming and saying, King, my dear king, you did a terrible thing. You have everything and you took someone else's wife and he died on the front lines. What does that say about you? He tells him a story about someone else and he asks King David to pass judgment on that person, verdict on that person. Mm-hmm. And then he says, that's you. Now, let's bring it back to what I said before. So what is Rabbi Akiva saying? That first, when a person does something in life, they pass the verdict on themselves, really. They think they're passing the verdict on someone else, but really they're passing the verdict on themselves. That's why first you pass the verdict on yourself, so to speak, and then you're held accountable. That's why Rabbi Akiva writes it backwards. So basically, we don't have time to elaborate. We're running out of time. What the Kabbalah, what Chassidus is teaching us, and we have to continue this because it's really, really very powerful, I think, is that every verdict that we say for others, that ganef, that selfish, she doesn't deserve better. When we pass a verdict on someone else, says the Torah, we're really passing the verdict on ourselves. That on a subconscious spiritual level, we are presented all day and night with opportunities to give verdicts on people. We read a text, we read an email, we read the news, we speak to friends, we speak to family members, and we're always offering opinions. And we always have opinions, and we have many times strong opinions, and we condemn, and we pass verdict. Says Kabbalah, you're really passing the verdict on yourself. That's why it says verdict and then accountability. When you pass judgment on others, you're really passing judgment on yourself. The stories that appear in your life are meant to appear to show you you're the man, you're the woman. You heard the story about that, the rich man with the sheep. It's really you. Nasan Hanavi says, that's you, King David. So when we hear a story now, we read a text message, we read an article, something happens. It's not just serendipity. It didn't just happen that the story fell in your lap. When you're now passing a verdict, you're going to be held accountable. We have to talk more about it because there's more to build on this.
Yeah.
I wanted to share this with you. I wanted to share with you that this is why Rabbi Akiva writes, okay, to repeat, let me go back to that saying with him. Let's go. He writes, payment is extracted from a person with his knowledge and without his knowledge. In other words, when you get repaid for something, it's with your knowledge because you passed verdict, but it's also subconsciously without your knowledge. You don't even realize it. That's why it says, and to whom you are destined to give a verdict and an accounting. Because first we pass verdict on someone else thinking, oh, we're judging them. You're really judging yourself. So God says, that's you. It's a complicated concept. But I wanted to share it because when I read this, I said to myself, like, this is too good not to share. This is too powerful. It's complicated. It's hard to understand. And you know what? I'm still mulling it over. I'm still thinking about it a lot because it's really scary. Because all day I have opinions. I'm one of the most opinionated people I know. Now I don't want to say my opinion. I'm saying opinion. It's really myself I'm talking about. And I have more to talk about this. So let's quickly count the Sfira together. The Sfira, and then we'll say, wish each other a happy Lag BaOmer. So tonight, you could take haircuts, you can listen to loud music again, and celebrate. If you're not going to come to Shul to have a little bonfire, make yourself a little bonfire if you want. Or somehow, some way, tonight and tomorrow, give a little extra daka, celebrate the life of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and Lag BaOmer. Okay, let's count together. Ready?
Mm-hmm.
Just make sure I have the right day. Okay, okay. Hayom.
Hayom.
Shnayim.
Shnayim.
Shloshim.
Shaloshim.
Yom. Shehem.
Shehem.
Arba.
Avar.
Shavuot.
Shavua.
Arba. Yamim.
Yamim.
LaOmer.
LaOmer.
Today is 32 days, which is 4 weeks and 4 days of the Omer. May the merciful one restore unto us the service of the Beit HaMikdash to its place speedily in our day. And let us say Amen.
Amen.
Selah, which means forever. So we counted the Sfira together. The countdown continues. And to be continued next week. I think next week, if we want to continue this concept, but we'll talk about the upcoming holiday of Shavuot, the giving and the receiving of the Torah. All right. So a pleasure.
Thank you, Freida.
I still have your mezuzahs, I told you, right?
Yes.
Okay. All right.
Right now.
Shalom, Shabbat Shalom. Margaret, when you coming home?